Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, the 7th of August, 2025. On Thursdays, we try to do a weekly briefing summarizing the news of the last week. I'm giving this update from Jerusalem. It's evening in Jerusalem on August 7th. Today is day 671. This update is as of this morning, Jerusalem time, Thursday, August 7th. So one of the questions this week is, what in the world is this new conversation about an increased invasion of Gaza and annexation in order for Hamas to be forced to release the hostages? On Tuesday, it was announced that Prime Minister Netanyahu has reached a decision to fully occupy Gaza and that he will urge the Security Cabinet to support the full conquest of Gaza. The Security Cabinet's meeting today, I think tonight in Israel. The Israeli defense circles oppose an expansion of ground operations in an area where the hostages are believed to be held. The Israeli military's chief of staff, his name is Zamir, presented Netanyahu and other security defense officials with options for continuing the campaign in Gaza. According to media reports, Zamir previously signaled his opposition to conquering Gaza, reportedly told ministers that full occupation would endanger the remaining hostages and also would exhaust the army. The United Nations called on the Israeli government's reported plans to expand Israel's operations deeply alarming, telling the Security Council that such a move would risk catastrophic consequences and could further endanger the lives of remaining hostages. And President Trump on Wednesday, that's yesterday, had a different perspective. He said the U.S. will not interfere with Israel's decision on whether or not to occupy more of Gaza. He stated that the call on potentially expanding military operations is, quote, pretty much up to Israel, end quote. Also this week, Israel's been considering annexing parts of the Gaza Strip, as I just mentioned. The strategy is to release hostages. This is from a Times of Israel article. A senior official told them that if both Israel and the U.S. stop their efforts in working with Hamas to reach a phased hostage deal, it will take a, quote, long time to reach a broader deal that will lead to the release of all the hostages and put an end to the war. I have a few more updates that are kind of specifically categorized related to Gaza. One is about aid distribution. U.S. Envoy Witkoff and President Trump Monday discussed plans for the U.S. taking over the delivery and provision of aid in Gaza because Israel's not handling it adequately. And on Wednesday, again yesterday, 4 aid trucks were overturned on a crowd close to midnight last night. It killed, this is the night before last, it killed 20 Palestinians and injured 30 others. The rugged road on which the incident occurred is under Israeli military control. On Tuesday, there were 110 food aid packages airdropped into the Gaza Strip as a part of the cooperation between Israel, the UAE, Jordan, Egypt, Germany, Belgium, and France. Sounds like there's a lot of people in that kitchen. Monday News reported that a 47-truck UN convoy was wholly overrun and ransacked within 3 hours last Wednesday, with hundreds of thousands, that's a quote, of aid seekers surging towards the entry checkpoint as Israeli troops fired rifle and artillery rounds. A UN official and security report said that more than 50 people were killed and more than 600 injured during that particular mission. The health ministry recorded at least 209 deaths among those who have sought aid since last Saturday. The U.S. dispersed an initial amount of funds of the $30 million that are approved to go to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. This was as of last Friday. A State Department spokesperson reported that the amount of aid funds dispersed is about 10% or $3 million. President Trump repeatedly claims that the U.S. has contributed $60 million for food to Gaza. And just in context, that's a minuscule amount in terms of the desperate need in the enclave. This past week, U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, Witkoff, and Ambassador to Israel, Michael Huckabee, toured a site in South Gaza of the GHF in order to assess the humanitarian situation and to help President Trump craft an aid plan. Huckabee praised the effectiveness of aid being delivered in the Gaza Strip. And one of the reasons I go through often several days of the week is just for us to remember that this is happening each and every day. Yesterday, there were reports that 135 people were killed, 771 wounded. Reports indicate that 87 people were killed and 570 have been rounded up just in the last 24 hours between Wednesday and Tuesday while waiting for humanitarian aid. On Tuesday, Israeli gunfire and airstrikes killed 79 people. 644 were wounded in that period of 24 hours. 52 people were killed and 354 were wounded by waiting for humanitarian assistance. On Monday, 119 people were killed, 866 wounded that day in Israeli attacks. Medics said 16 people were killed while seeking aid. 5 adults reportedly died of hunger that day. On Saturday, 83 people were killed, 1,079 people wounded in Israeli attacks in the Gaza Strip over a 24-hour period of time, including 39 killed and over 849 wounded who were waiting for humanitarian aid. The health ministry in Gaza said the total number of aid seekers killed since the beginning of the war has risen to 1,655. That's specifically people who were killed while seeking aid, 11,800 wounded. There were 5 deaths in the past day due to hunger and nutrition or malnutrition. This brings the death toll of victims of hunger and malnutrition to 193, including 96 children. A few other updates about Gaza. There have been more evacuations this week. The IDF issued an evacuation notice to residents of the Nasser neighborhood in Khan Yunis, calling on them to evacuate westward. The army emphasized the evacuation order does not include the Nasser hospital. Hamas responded to Israel's request to allow the Red Cross access to the hostages by saying it would agree to that request, but it would depend on Gaza aid crossings remaining open and to stop air travel while aid packages are being delivered to hostages. Hamas denied that it's willing to disarm, saying resistance is a national and legal right as long as occupation continues, and that it would continue until the establishment of an independent, sovereign Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital. The IDF reported that it killed on July 24th the deputy commander of Hamas al-Farqan battalion, Salah al-Adin Zaatra, who was responsible for directing and advancing numerous terrorist attacks against Israeli civilians and IDF troops in the Gaza Strip. In an unprecedented step, this past week, all 22 Arab League states on Tuesday, for the first time, issued a joint call for Hamas to disarm and to relinquish power in Gaza. They backed a declaration that was signed by several states at the UN conference the last week of July. In the occupied Palestinian territories, in May of 2023, I wrote a story about a village that's dear to my heart. It's called El Khair. It's a Bedouin village in the South Hebron Hills. There are people there that I'm close to. I wrote about Sheikh Haj Suleiman Hathalin, who was killed by extremist settlers in January of 2022. And now, more than 3 years later, another member of the Hathalin family has been killed. Local activist Alda Hathalin was shot by a settler just in the past week or so. According to Israeli reports, the suspected shooter, Yanan Levy, was released from house arrest on Sunday and has already been seen working the land. This is in the occupied West Bank that he was working on just before the shooting took place. I heard a direct report from a U.S. government official saying that there is a video of the killing and that Hathalin was videotaping an incident that he was not involved with when you see the camera being aimed at him and fired, and then the screen goes black. Levy was documented firing his handgun during an altercation with residents of the village of Umm al-Khair in the south of the West Bank last week. 4 Palestinians were arrested after Levy pointed them out to Israeli forces. Hathalin was shot in the chest. Although he was not involved in the incident, he was about 90 feet away. Monday's news announced that 3 Palestinians from the village who were arrested after Hathalin's killing were released from custody, and 4 at that time still remained. There was also another Palestinian man shot dead in the West Bank this week. The man, Mo'in Asfar, was killed during attacks by settlers in the villages of Aqraba and Jorish, located in Area B of the West Bank, which is under Israeli security and Palestinian civil control. Settler attacks have led to many, many more violent deaths of Palestinians, and those attacks have been on the increase. In Israel over the weekend, President Herzog shared images of Israeli hostages Evayatar David and Rom Brzlowski, who were featured in videos published by Hamas and Palestinian Jihad in recent days. This was on social media. He said their faces say it all, forced to dig their own graves, tormented with execution, starved and tortured, wasting away in Hamas terror tunnels. We continue to call for the release of hostages and all of those held unjustly. And what we want elected officials to know is that starvation is a reality for the hostages, certainly, which is a horror, just as starvation is a reality for thousands of Palestinians. All the more need to get them adequate food and assistance, which is not happening under GHF and militarized humanitarian assistance. A 20-year-old Palestinian died in Israeli Megiddo prison this past week. The person was detained without trial under administrative detention since May. This man was the sixth prisoner that's known of to die in prison since the war began in October of 2023. On Wednesday night, there were actually physical altercations between the IDF headquarters, between security members and the family of hostages during a rally calling for the release of hostages. The family of hostages called for the release of hostages, and they protested by saying the time is running out for those who might still be alive in Gaza. Also on Wednesday, there were significant anti-war protests in Israel, led by Standing Together in the south of the state. Protesters held signs that said there is starvation in Gaza, and they called for the IDF withdrawal from the Strip. Protesters held pictures of Gazan children and could be heard saying, "In Rafah and Eshkol, let the children grow up. There's hunger in Gaza. Get out of the Strip now." More than 600 retired Israeli security officials, including former heads of intelligence agencies, sent a letter to President Trump to pressure Israel to immediately end the war on Gaza. It's our professional judgment that Hamas no longer poses a strategic threat to Israel, the open letter read. In a video accompanying the letter, former director of the Shin Bet security forces, Ami Aylon, said, "When we achieved all the military objectives, this war ceased being a just war and is leading Israel to lose its identity and security." The Israeli government Tuesday unanimously voted to dismiss Attorney General Gali Baharav Miara from office. Immediately after the vote, Israel's High Court of Justice issued a temporary order upholding an earlier ruling that Baharav Miarav's dismissal would not come into effect until further notice from the court. This is important because the dismissal of the Attorney General, if that was implemented, it would essentially allow Netanyahu to appoint people to that position who could have the power to end his own corruption trial. Monday news reported that 5 Israelis were arrested as police blocked a march to the border with Gaza, calling for an end to the siege of the enclave. Israeli news described the protest as a leftist march calling to break the siege on the Gaza Strip. They described how it was blocked by Israeli police on Monday, shortly after setting off to Israel's border with the enclave from the city of Sderot, located about 1 mile from the fence. They were arrested for disturbing the peace. Member of the Knesset, Ofer Kasif, was forcibly removed from the Knesset this past week. From the podium Monday night, he was quoting an author, David Grossman, who said in an interview published last week that genocide is taking place in Gaza. Survivors of the Hamas invasion on October 7th, 2023, will once again hold a separate memorial ceremony on the 2-year anniversary of the attack, boycotting the official state-run ceremony, God have mercy, that we're already talking about the second year commemoration of October 7th, 2023. In terms of international news, more than 100 journalists, photographers, war correspondents signed a petition demanding immediate and unsupervised foreign press access to the Gaza Strip. Sky News reported that. And Iran this last week executed 2 men in separate cases on Wednesday, accusing one of spying for Israel and the other of being a member of the Islamic State group. In Lebanon, the armed group Hezbollah on Wednesday condemned the cabinet's decision moving towards a state monopoly on arms. They said it's a grave sin that only serves Israel. And on Tuesday, a Lebanese government meeting on the subject of Hezbollah's disarmament, the organization's Secretary General, Naim Qassem, said a U.S. proposal for disarmament would allow Israel the option of any action, while Lebanon is the one giving up. He added that Hezbollah would fire missiles at Israel if it launched a large-scale attack on Lebanon. Speaking of missiles, this past week, a Houthi missile launched from Yemen was intercepted by Israeli forces early on Tuesday after sirens sounded across part of the country. Israeli news reported this week related to Syria that the Israeli Druze spiritual leader Sheikh Mawfaq Tarif said that the Druze in South Syria are undergoing ethnic cleansing, systematic murder under the nose of the free world. According to him, the Sueda province is under a complete siege. There's no electricity, running water, fuel, gas, or communication throughout the region. In the U.S., on Friday of last week, news was announced that the U.S. has imposed sanctions that deny visas to the members of the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the Palestinian Authority after it was reported by the State Department that they are not in compliance with their commitments. Late last week, more than half of Senate Democrats on July 30th supported 2 resolutions seeking to block offensive weapons sales to Israel. While both resolutions ultimately failed, the vote highlights the party's growing frustration with Israel's handling of the war in Gaza. Those were the joint resolutions of disapproval that were brought forward by Bernie Sanders. This week, speaking of Congress, U.S. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, became one of the highest ranking elected officials to visit the West Bank when he spoke at a conference in the settlement area. It's unfathomable that U.S. members of Congress are meeting in Israeli settlements that are built on land that's been confiscated from Palestinian families and communities. Haaretz reported that the U.S. House Speaker visited the West Bank settlement of Ariel in order to address a settler conference. Jeremy Ben-Ami, who's a high-profile Jewish leader in Washington, D.C., he's the president of J Street, which is described in this news article as the liberal Jewish Zionist advocacy group. He said he does believe that Israel is committing mass genocide in Gaza. The statement came only days after he repeatedly denied the claim while debating Mehdi Hassan, a pro-Palestinian U.S. journalist, on Pod to Save the World. In response to his sudden shift in opinion, he said, "I have, however, been persuaded rationally by legal and scholarly arguments that international courts will one day find that Israel has broken the International Genocide Convention." The Israeli consulate in New York featured an ad of the hostage Aviatar David, who was seen in a recent Hamas video on one of the Times Square's billboard to highlight the plight of hostages held by Hamas. And over the weekend, U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, visited Hostage Square in Tel Aviv to speak with the families of hostages, taking part in protests calling for the immediate release of their loved ones. Family members who met with Steve Witkoff said that he assured them that the U.S. plans to push for a deal to release all the hostages at once, with Hamas agreeing to disarm and Netanyahu committed to ending the war in Gaza. May it be so. A Gallup poll released this week found that only 32% of U.S. adults support Israel's military actions in Gaza. This is a record low number since the war was launched, 670 some days ago. The poll also found the strongest partisan split yet. Support among those who identify as Republicans remains strong at 71%, but only 8% of Democrats and 25% of independents say they back Israel's military actions. In terms of updates on Christians in the Middle East, I'm currently, as you know, in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. I've been spending the week here, or at least the last few days. I've spoken in my daily updates about my village to Taibe this past week, just outside of Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. I had the privilege of meeting with Christian leaders there, priests from the village, the city mayor, who talked about the recent attacks of settlers. We saw firsthand the ancient Byzantine church that was desecrated by extremist settlers who brought their whole herd of cattle into that sacred space. Villagers said that the desecration was actually worse than the fires that were set around some of the perimeters of the village. The fires could destroy, but the church is sacred, they told us. Listening to the Catholic Melkite priest, Father Jack, he told us how Christians only want to live in peace. If you did not read the article that I co-wrote with Christopher Huff, a colleague at CMEP, please do. It's in Public Orthodoxy. It's called Taibe Under Attack, the Erasure of Christianity in the Holy Land. Another article to be sure not to miss is one I co-wrote with Dr. Ben Norquist, another colleague at CMEP. This was published in Sojourners. It's been published online. It'll be coming out in the print edition of the Sojourners magazine. Lord, when did we see you thirsty in Gaza? Israel has turned God's most essential weapon. Sorry, I'll read that again. Lord, when did you see us thirsty in Gaza? Israel has turned God's most essential provision into a weapon. Lord, when did we see you thirsty in Gaza? In the Middle East, water is more than a resource. Water is a source of power, and in many cases, a weapon of war. The Gaza Strip is the most urgent and devastating example. Finally, Bethlehem Bible College has announced their fall classes. They're inviting people to apply for peacemaking courses through the Institute of Peace and Justice. They say peacemaking means turning hatred into love, contempt into respect. It's not an easy task. Yet when we witness the suffering of Gazan families, we're reminded of our responsibility to act. Study peacemaking online this fall with people from around the world to learn from Palestinian scholars and leaders. Together, we can work towards a world of justice and peace for all. BBC is accepting applications now, and I happen to have the privilege of being one of their international instructors teaching on biblical justice and spiritual formation. So that's an update from the past week. May we continue in our efforts. May God go before us in the name of Christ. Amen.